started. So welcome to this webinar organized by South Pole, CGIAR, IMI, and WBCSD on the water impact protocol for the food and agriculture sector companies. Next slide, please. My name is Emeline Philus. I'm the director of FRESH, which is Food Reform for Sustainability and Health. It's a project of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is a member-based organization composed of about 200 companies working towards a sustainable society. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So why are we going to talk about this impact calculator today? Basically, what has been released 2 years ago by FOLU, the Food and Land Use Coalition, is that the food system externalities are humongous, and they actually are bigger than the market value of the global food system. If you look at this graphic here, you can see the estimation was that the total market value of the global food system was at $10 trillion per year, while in fact the negative impacts combined from the health impacts, the environmental impacts, and the economic impacts was at 12 trillion. Now, the bad news is that since then, there is a latest report that was published a couple of months ago by the scientific group of the United Nations Food System Summit, which has actually estimated not to 12 trillion, but to nearly 20 trillion US dollars, the negative impacts, which is basically the double of the total financial value of food consumption. So we do have a problem. Why is that? Next slide, please. We believe that the main reason why we have this problem is that today, the total value of a company is not actually being measured or communicated totally, because there is a big part that is intangible value, which nobody looks at or reports about. This basically corresponds to what I was just showing before. It's the impact that can be positive or negative on health, on the environment, and on society. Now, our willingness is to actually change this so that actually a bigger share of this intangible value is reliably measured and communicated. How do we get there? Next slide, please. So we need a method, and there are actually, fortunately or unfortunately, multiple different methodologies. Way too many to our taste, actually, but you can see them here. So they're all useful. A lot of organizations and companies are using one or several and trying to find the best way to report towards investors, etc. But in fact, our journey is to say we actually need to really facilitate and simplify this. We want to harmonize the landscape of impact valuation approaches through developing protocols. Next slide, please. So in fact, we've embarked on a journey towards this harmonization. And you can see here a publication made in December 2019, valuing the impact of food towards practical and comparable monetary valuation of food system impacts, done together with GAF and FoodZivi. So basically, what this one does is call for a consortium of stakeholders to standardize the way of measuring, to actually help measure the abatement costs, but more importantly, highlights the development of standard impact pathways for operationalizing and harmonizing impact valuation methods. Next slide, please. So this links to a wider concept that we're trying to push and which we see actually being picked up increasingly internationally. In fact, we have high hopes that this will make it to the plenary of the Food System Summit. It's the concept of the true value of food. The true value of food being the fact that actually food should be valued for its positive and negative impacts on health, on the environment, and on society. There are three pillars to this work that needs to be done in order to really reflect the true value of food. The first part is technical and research. This is exactly what we're talking about today. This is what I was talking about, harmonizing the way of valuing, and in fact, what we're going to be presenting today. Next to that, important to keep in mind is that there is also a need to actually talk with investors and the finance community in the wider sense, and make sure that the way of actually measuring the financial return of a company and the way of investing in those companies takes into account this real value. And last but not least, there is a need to also work with policymakers so that the policy framework is adapted and also conducive to actually reflecting the true value of food. Next slide, please. So today for this webinar, this session, please, is being recorded and you can engage using the chat function. Next slide, please. And this is the agenda. So you just got an introduction. Now, my colleague Deepa Mago will be giving you an overview of this water impact protocol that we're happy to present today. And thereafter, there will be 2 panels and then closing remarks from Carlo Galli from the WBCSD. The 2 panels will be led by Tatiana Fedotova from Qantas and Alexandra Frank from South Pole. So I'll pass the floor now with no further ado to Deepa, and thank you again for your participation.
Thanks very much, Emmeline, for the introduction. And sorry, there's a small typo here, which I'd like to correct before I go forward. So the closing remarks will come from Carlo Galli at Nestle, not WBCSD. Apologies for that mistake from my end. And what I'd like to quickly do going forward is actually give you an overview of what is called the Water Impact Protocol that I have led the development of from WBCSD. Now, building on the introduction that Emmeline, my colleague, just gave, freshwater is actually a major area of impact for the food and agriculture system only after climate change and land use. And as Emmeline highlighted, standardized approach for businesses is key in helping measure and evaluate these impacts. And so what we have done through developing this resource called the Water Impact Protocol is helping provide a systematic and standardized approach to companies to actually understand their major freshwater related impacts, measure, evaluate, and manage them. So we have a resource here called the Water Impact Protocol, which we are excited to share with you today, and the public consultation actually opens today, using which we are aiming to provide a systematic and standardized approach to companies to measure and evaluate their major freshwater related impacts. Now, in this process, we are not developing a new methodology, but we are actually referring to a lot of other methodologies that are available in this space that can help companies measure and evaluate their major freshwater related impacts. There are 2 other protocols that are currently in development, the one on nitrogen related impacts of companies and the other one on impacts due to food consumption. And together, the 3 protocols we hope will provide a complete guidance to companies for their impact valuation and measurement exercises. Now, food and agriculture sector companies can use this guidance, but we think they should have done an initial screening of their operations for water risks, and they should understand where their priorities lie based on their water risks, but also on other business considerations, including financial considerations that they may have. Now, what it helps companies do, it helps answer some of the questions for them. For example, 1, where are the major water footprints across my operations and value chains that can lead to major impacts? Then the companies can arrive at what is called an impact pathway specific to their company that links the source of impact with the actors involved. So they can understand the whole chain of impacts and then accordingly make decisions. Then it helps them understand what are the key principles that should form a part of their impact measurement and valuation exercises, and also learn from the other businesses through some case examples that we're trying to bring through the Water Impact Protocol. Now, the protocol actually covers only fresh water in its scope, but looks at it both from the point of view of quantity and quality. Within quality, it looks at both point and non-point pollution sources, except nitrogen, which is part of a separate protocol. But it does not look at dependencies of food and ag system actors on fresh water, which means how the food and ag sector business gets impacted because of natural capital changes of other actors. It is not taken into account in this particular protocol. Now, again, the protocol has been developed by WBCSD in collaboration with Food Civi, but there has been a working group of 9 different organizations. The experts from where have actually contributed to this work and have provided guidance to it in the last 6 to 8 months. And there is some additional content support that has been received from the South Pole. Now, the Water Impact Protocol is actually based on a very standard structure, which is recommended by the, in the report, the Valuing the Impact of Food. And all the 3 different protocols that I refer to are being developed on this standard structure, which hopefully is useful for companies to get a methodical approach to thinking through impacts and then measuring the value of them and managing them. Now, just a couple of pointers on companies that would end up using the protocol. You can decide on the scope of application of the protocol. So the protocol can apply to both direct operations and supply chains. It can be applied at the level of a product or an enterprise as well. And we leave it to companies to decide what level of action they are aiming for to decide the scope of application of the protocol. And another important pointer is that the working group of this important work actually advises companies to balance the exhaustivity versus the practicality aspect in evaluating their impacts. So while companies should be exhaustive in understanding what all impacts their operations are causing, they should be practical to determine which impacts are actually major ones that they can actually address through clear means. So the balanced approach is what the working group advises you to take. And finally, as I said before, we are not developing a new methodology, but actually I'm making deriving sort of information from other existing methodologies a lot of the times, but also referring to the other ongoing developments in the area, including the science-based targets to measure freshwater initiative, which is currently concluding its guidance for business on developing science-based targets for nature for freshwater. And the good news is we are opening the first draft of the water impact protocol for public consultation today. And I would request my colleague on this call to actually provide the link in the chat box where you all could go and look at the draft of the protocol and provide feedback through a clear survey. So we invite you to engage here, look at the draft and provide feedback. The consultation would be open for the next 1 month, after which we will use the protocol to use your feedback to update the protocol, release the first version, and then followed by that, invite companies to actually pilot test the first version of the water impact protocol. And thank you for your attention. What I would like to do now is to hand over to Tatiana Fedotova from Qantas, who would actually be leading the first panel discussion for this session. So over to you, Tatiana.
Thank you very much, Deepa, for the presentation and passing me the word. Good day, everybody. So my name is Tatiana Fedotova. I lead global water work at Qantas, which is a sustainability consultancy group. And I very much welcome you to this first panel discussion today. So the theme of the panel, as you can see, is enterprise risk management, disclosure and standardized approaches to assessing impacts. And very importantly, why is it key to have these standardized approaches? So our panelists today represent major stakeholders who are currently leading ongoing efforts within the water community to really standardize and harmonize approaches as much to measure and assess impacts as setting targets, reporting, disclosing, water accounting, as well as business risk and strategy information. And of course, the ultimate objective of these efforts is to help streamline decision-making within businesses as well as investors and prioritize action and investments on areas with greatest positive impact potential, as much from the perspective of nature as from the perspective of businesses. So we have with us Monica McBride, who is the WWF US's Director of Agricultural and Environmental Metrics on the Food and Freshwater team. And Monica has been co-leading the Science Based Target Network's Freshwater Hub for the past year and a half. Jehan Fabre is head of water stewardship program for the Danone Group, who notably led development of Danone's water policy, and she has a particular interest in developing innovative projects driven by collective actions at landscape level. And Francesca Recanati, Senior Technical Manager and Environmental Specialist with the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, who has been leading the development of the CDSB Water Guidance for water-related financial disclosures, which was actually released yesterday at World Water Week. So to launch us into the conversation, I would like to ask you, Monica, straight away, how do you envisage companies setting science-based targets for water? How should they prioritize action, and how will they go about achieving these targets?
Great, thank you, Tatiana, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank WBCSD for having me. As Tatiana mentioned, I've been co-leading the development of the science-based.
Monica, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a bit of an echo when you speak. Could you just put off the partible window for the moment? I think there may be an interference. If you have the partible window separately open, could you just put that off because there was echo?
Yes, I just closed it. Is that better?
This is better. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So as I mentioned, and Tatiana mentioned, I've been co-leading the development of the science-based targets for freshwater methodology for the past 1.5 years now. And how we've been envisioning the science-based targets for water, we really believe that these will build off of a lot of the great work and guidance that's already been developed in the water target setting space, specifically that guidance on setting contextual targets at the site level and setting enterprise level targets. And what the methodology will really do is it will begin to answer the question of how much is enough to address the water quantity and quality challenges in the specific subbasins in which companies are operating. And it will really try to tell the company not only how much is enough for that basin, but how much is enough for a specific company operating within that basin to say that they've been doing their fair share of achieving that goal. And so in terms of how companies will be accepted or expected to set targets, we are setting out a 3-step process to setting these targets, and it will mirror what a lot of leading companies are already doing in this space and what Danone has probably already been doing and will be speaking about. It will start with a materiality assessment to understand where within your own operations and within your value chain you will need to set water quality targets or water quantity targets. It will then be followed by a prioritization step, which will take all of those sites that have shown up as material in that first step and really help you prioritize which ones need to have the more rigorous targets, which will be based on really detailed hydrological models, and more of the science part of the science-based targets, and which sites will be more at that enterprise level, which won't go into that level of depth, but will still require some type of target to be included. And once you've done that prioritization, which there's a lot of detail in the methodology that we'll be releasing on which indicators you should use, then you actually get to step 3, which is setting the target. And this is where you start to do a lot of that modeling and that science part of science-based targets. And as far as achieving the targets, that's actually coming in steps 4 and 5 of the methodology. And what we are recommending for companies in terms of how to achieve them is to follow a modified version of the mitigation hierarchy. So start with avoid, followed by reducing, then restoring and regenerating, and finally looking at actions to really transform your business to help meet some of these targets. And achieving science-based targets in terms of the basin will require collective action. Each company can obviously do their own fair share. However, that is likely not going to add up to enough for the basin. So while the methodology won't be prescriptive in terms of how to take collective action, we do anticipate that in order to truly achieve some of the science-based targets and address the most pressing challenges within the basins, companies will need to take collective action and work with other stakeholders in the basin to really achieve these. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Tatiana.
Thank you very much, Monica. It's great to hear that the science-based targets methodology does build off existing guidance, indeed, and provides quite a clear 3-step approach to defining the fair share of the company to help solve the most pressing challenges at basin level. Now, turning to you, Jehan, it will be great to hear from a very practical company experience. We know that Danone's water strategy is articulated around 3 pillars: preserving water resources, driving water circularity, and providing safe drinking water. And so with these objectives in mind, can you tell us why is it a priority for Danone to measure and value its impacts on water? And very concretely, how do you do that?
Hi, everyone. That's a great pleasure to reconnect with all the water friends today, and many of you that I know very well. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to give some thoughts about how Danone is valuing impact. As Tatiana was saying, so I was the one designing the water policy for the Danone Group, and we were the first company to have as a commitment to be a water impact positive company by 2030. Many other companies has followed now us, but what do we mean by being a water impact positive company? It first means to be as neutral as possible in terms of impact for our direct operation, and then bring positive impacts to the ecosystem around our production sites. And what we mean by positive impact is not only and solely around water, but as well looking at carbon and biodiversity, positive impact you can bring to the ecosystem around and the landscape around your production sites. And indeed, and echoing what Monica was saying before, we have different steps to go to the valuations of the impacts we are having on the field. The first one is indeed to do this water risk assessment to understand where to prioritize action. We do this water risk assessment using the water risk filters that many of you, I guess, know very well. Once we have done that, it comes to the moment to do socio-economic studies on the field and water cycle studies as well. We're equipped with a large team of hydrogeologists. We're super lucky about that, and they are helping us to understand the pressures, the challenge the landscape is facing, what are the many users on this landscape, and so who we should embark and which type of action we should put in place. Then it comes to the time of costing those actions and looking at them versus the cost of inaction. I remember that a CDP report issued earlier this year said that cost of inaction is often 5 times higher than cost of actions. So often there is no doubt about the fact that we need to go into actions. And then when we have developed actions, indeed, it's time of monitoring the impact, the positive impact those actions can have on the field. And for that, we use various methodology. I join many of you that says that there are many different methodology, and if we don't define properly impact, it's going to be very complex to compare companies and to understand what impact positive really means.
Thank you very much, Jihan, for underlying the process. I think it's very interesting to hear how concretely a company goes from using globally available guidance and tools to assessing local challenges with your local teams and being able to indeed value impact to define progress against your goals. So thank you for sharing that. And Francesca, on your side, could you please share your view on the evolution of the disclosure space around water? We know that it's bubbling and it's moving fast at various levels, and also reflect on how the disclosure ecosystem and the risk management systems within the company relate to each other.
Yeah, sure. So thanks WBCSD for having invited me to this event, and thanks for the challenging question. So I will start from the general sustainability reporting environment. So as you said, Tatiana, currently sustainability reporting and disclosure environment is very dynamic, both at the regional, think about EU, and the international level. Think about the steps taken by the IFRS Foundation for the establishment for a single international body for sustainability standards. And besides that, we see regulators increasing their demand on such corporate disclosures. For example, again, EU, like above all, and also investors that are increasing their expectation on like corporate disclosure on sustainability topics. Of course, water is central in this context, being a crucial resource for businesses, but also for our lives. And it is linked to other environmental issues such as climate, land use change, as well as social issues, for example. And for this reason, it should be considered in the majority, if not all, sustainability disclosures. So given this context, we can probably, if not certainly, say that the mandatory water disclosure will increase. I'm not sure exactly when in the future, because it depends also on the different jurisdictions, but it will happen. It is already happening with climate and TCFD disclosure, that it's now mandatory in different jurisdictions around the world. The latest to announce it was Switzerland. So like every day we have updates on this. So like on the company side, so company need to start working on comprehensive water reporting that shows the full picture, not only metrics. When I say full picture, I mean that aspects like those that have been discussed before, so the definition of clear targets and how companies are going to achieve them and measure impact have to be clearly disclosed and linked to overall business strategy with a clear description of the resources, both financial and personnel, that have been allocated to achieve water goal, water targets. And like, it's a journey, like there are plenty of resources that can support this journey, and from tools to assess water-related risks, to guidance, to disclosure guidance, like the one CTSB has released yesterday.
Thank you, Francesca, for indeed reminding us that mandatory water disclosure will increase following the path set by TCFD, and that clarity of process at all of these steps of the journey is absolutely essential and will be even more so in the future. So now, kind of coming back a little bit more towards the water impact protocol, clearly we can hear that it's coming to life. It's being developed as part of a very busy context of different efforts that are ongoing to standardize and harmonize guidance for businesses, for investors as well, and also businesses actually trying out different approaches and carving out their own way that fits within their own circumstances. So, as part of that context, Monica, coming back to you, how do you see in the future the connections between the Water Impact Protocol and the Science-Based Targets methodology articulate?
Yeah, I see two main ways I think that they're connected and linked. And as Deepa mentioned, the Science-Based Targets method is already slightly woven in to the impact protocol, which is great to see, and I think really important, especially as our methodology comes to life and it is finally launched next year. But the first way that I really see it kind of adding to what we are doing is the fact that it takes the method that we're developing one step further and adds that valuation piece so that companies can really understand what is the financial risk and the financial implications of action versus inaction. Our method will really just be telling you how much is enough from the water quality and water quantity perspective in a basin, but it's not going to tell you how much that means and what that translates to. And then I think the other key differentiator and piece of this method that also helps take ours a little bit further is the fact that it's very specific on the food and beverage sector. And it really drills down into one industry. So our method right now is designed to be applicable to all industries, and therefore it will have, shortcomings for certain ones. It won't be as applicable. And so in the future, we would love to create more sector level guidance. And I think that this methodology or this protocol is really the first step in doing that for the food and beverage and agriculture sector. And so it will be great as we continue down this path to build off of what's been done in the protocol to make ours even more specific for certain sectors.
Great. So if I hear you correctly, they're quite complementary, right? In terms of adding the whole cost of action versus cost of inaction and value piece to the SBT methodology, which is great to hear. And so Jehan, from your perspective, so we've heard about the process you have in terms of assessing impact, setting targets, measuring your actions. So how do you see the water impact protocol adding value to your work? And do you already have an idea of how you will apply it in practice?
Thank you, Tatiana. I have great hope in having this protocol helping us to determine better threshold between the different stakeholders. It's a very complex one and not really well addressed so far in the water stewardship program. So I'm hoping that this will at least open the discussions and help us to be a bit more have a more standardized approach when it comes to determining those thresholds. That's one. And secondly, I hope it's going to be as well an important milestone towards true value accounting, going beyond economic outcomes and outputs and really looking as well at the true value we can create, the true impact we have as well, negative they can be, and helping us to address and have the well-tailored actions that can really answer those negative impacts, but as well bring positive impacts to the habitats in which we are actually doing our businesses.
Thank you, Jihan. Maybe just a clarification question for our audience. Can you clarify what you mean by helping to determine thresholds between different stakeholders in your case?
Yes, it's about responsibility of the users and meaning who is using what in terms of water, but who has which means as well. And so where the responsibility lies and what do we want to achieve for this habitat altogether, taking in account the responsibilities of everyone. I hope I clarified well.
Thank you. That definitely clarifies. And I think this question of responsibility speaks to Monica's point about ultimately achieving the targets will take collective action, of course, at landscape level. And that question is essential to, these thresholds are essential to be clear and clarified. And finally, Francesca, from your view, so the CDSV water guidance has just been released, and so how do you see the water impact protocol actually supporting the response to increasing demands for water-related reporting, as much from regulators as from investors?
It will certainly support the standardization and harmonization of valuation of freshwater impact, and consequently of water-related disclosures, because usually reporting standards are not prescriptive on such method or approaches. You just, like, a company have to say how they did this valuation. So the water impact protocol can guide companies in these journeys and will support a market practice that will enable also comparison, benchmarking of the different disclosures of company, at least in the food and agriculture sector.
Great, thank you very much. Indeed, the point of being able to compare and benchmark essential from an investor perspective, but not only, of course. I think we're coming to the end of our panel. Does any of you, Francesca, Jihan, or Monica, would like to make any final remark or share a final thought on this? Nope. Perfect. Therefore, then in this case, thank you very much. And I very much echo, I think, the responses to the last question in terms of, basically, if we had to summarize it, this protocol is definitely an important milestone towards true value accounting in the water space, and hopefully brings us one step closer to creating very impactful solutions where they matter most, on what they matter most, and create positive impact at landscape and watershed level. So thank you very much to our panelists, Monica, Jihan, and Francesca, for this very insightful thoughts and reflections. And over to you, Alexandra, to lead the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. I'm excited to introduce the next panel, bringing together representatives from a major global agribusiness, a leading NGO, and a global agricultural research program. And this panel will focus now more on the practical experiences of assessing and valuing freshwater impacts. My name is Alexandra Frank. I joined from South Pole. We're an environmental consultancy helping companies set and achieve their science-based targets through action from the boardroom to the growers on the field. And I'm really glad to introduce Ria, who is leading the Finance for Sustainability team in Olam. If you could please all turn your cameras on, or at least I cannot see you yet in the yes, Ria, you were there, but not in the speaker view. So Ria is leading the Finance for Sustainability team in Olam, establishing a financial link to sustainability and integrating natural capital valuation into olam's business decisions. We also have Jens. He's an agronomist and environmental engineer at Helvetas, where he manages projects for sustainable value chains and leads multi-stakeholder engagements in regional stewardship initiatives. And last but not least, we have also Stefan bringing the agricultural research perspective. He's the program director of the CGR research program, Water, Land and Ecosystems, and also the strategic program director of Water, Food and Ecosystems at INWI. And we will start right away with you, Stefan. With your experience of leading international research programs in Africa, Asia, and Europe, what are the complexities associated with water quality impact assessments, and how can companies deal with them and overcome them?
Thank you, Alexandra. Colleagues, friends, really nice to reconnect while we're all at home since 1.5 years, and good to see some of the Stockholm friends and colleagues. That's a good question, Alexandra. You know, as a scientist, I'm more involved in large-scale understanding of water management problems when it comes to food production, agricultural innovations, etc. And what I found striking is that the protocol is not only looking at the production part of the food, but also look at the whole food system. I think that is positive. You know, from the pre-production to the water use, which is usually the highest in the production as well. As you know, agriculture needs some 70% of all global water withdrawal. So that's a very hard fact and a huge footprint. And in some agricultural-based economies, it can be as much as 90% plus. So, but it's not only looking at that, but it's also looking at processing, distribution, packaging, and up to food waste. I think that I found really positive. What are the challenges based on my experiences? Well, first, it's nice, and these global assessments are useful, and there's beautiful papers written about that. If you look at the Lancet report, for instance, giving all sorts of global numbers, which are very useful, but it is at the very local scale where the decisions are made, where the impact is made. And that requires a translation of these kind of global numbers to very local situations. I was impressed, Jehan just explained that they have a kind of a whole army of hydrogeologists working for them and assessing every single company, if I understood you right, Jehan. But I'm not so sure if that is true for all the companies. I'm sure for Danone you do that perfectly well, but that's probably not, particularly for smaller companies, is not the case. But you need to translate that then to local situations. And you asked me about speaking water quality in particular. If you look at the Lancet report, it gives numbers, for instance, for phosphorus application globally. Yeah, and we know it's a finite resource, and we need to reuse and recycle phosphorus as much as we can. But these global targets are a good thing to have. But how do you translate that into a local situation? You know, how do you translate that to a field scale? And then it's not the annual application of fertilizer. It's when you do that during the day. When do you do that in the growing season? What is the weather of the next days that might flush out some of the phosphorus? So it's so complex. So the operational decision making is kind of is making the difference. So therefore, these protocols, it's fascinating, but how much they translate into action and local operational decisions is a big challenge, based on data and all the complexities in between.
Thank you, Stefan. Absolutely, highlighting the importance of the timing of those measurements, especially when we look at water quality, and also the challenges of assessing the impacts across the whole value chain of the food production system. I'd love to come back to that later on. And I think you neatly already laid out the challenge that companies face between, on the one hand, having global environmental targets, needing to take very, very local action, and then scale them up again to their in enterprise-wide targets. So Jens, moving over to you, with your experience on the ground, how can companies balance this split between local action and enterprise-wide targets, and how can valuation approaches help there?
Yes, thanks to Monica, we already know the target setting a little bit, how large corporations in the food and agribusiness value chains should do that. But to use valuation is actually a very practical way for corporations to compare different sites, do the target setting for different sites, and do the monitoring for different sites. So since our distinguished audience is keen on examples, I have heard that and have seen that. My colleague Sophie will put an example of a water project, which I summarize to show these different approaches or these different reasons why an economic figure can be very, very helpful to push people to action. So it's about a Pakistan project where all basmati exporting farmers and the involved value chain partners are actually pumping and pumping. Surface water is rarely used. And it's quite clear if it goes on like this, it will not last very long anymore. So if you just take the absolute figures there, it doesn't move actors really to set new targets and create new action. But if you compare the pumping costs and all of them seeing them increasing, then actually we get quite a catalyst for action. And this is just a very sober agronomic figure. It's not yet even the true value costing as Jehan was proposing. So from that point of view, even the, let's say, non-technical experts can be moved if you use a nice valuation and some nice economic figures to get people a very visualized idea of how critical things are.
Thank you, Jens. Yeah, I think you highlight here also to take into account the economic realities of farmers and how important it is to speak with all stakeholders in the whole watershed. And how does this help also in the comparability for companies between one local project in Pakistan and maybe another initiative elsewhere?
Exactly. The local figures, the absolute figures of water may not tell a lot to higher management levels. That is one thing. Sometimes they can be misleading. A water consumption in one place of the earth can be very different than another one and still be, even if it is higher, more sustainable than in the other place. So their evaluation can help to balance it. Although we are far away from having these methodologies. The other thing is that it may help also to show the whole stakeholders involved into the basin, involved in the water catchment, to get to a, let's say, comparison. Where can they actually start the activities? What is still affordable? And where other stakeholders, other authorities, governmental authorities to renovate irrigation facilities or something like that have to be integrated or approached.
Thank you very much, Jens. And scaling this up again to a company's understanding of value and future value, Ria, with you establishing the financial link between exactly olam's action on the ground and their impact on the long-term value, what are the key challenges that you have faced for when you accounted for freshwater impacts as part of olam's non-financial capital assessment, and how do you overcome them?
Thanks, Alexandra. So, like every new concept, there are always challenges. Challenges are, of course, externally when it's related to what valuation methodologies you have to use, especially when there is, when we started, there was not much of standardization. Now, of course, with the work which is happening. And plus, there are always some challenges internally also. So I'm not sure whether audience want to interest in internal, what challenges we faced, and also external, but I think any company who wants to start, and it's not just about big companies, SMEs, anyone, when it comes to valuation, generally, they are internally, the business units, everyone, they're also interested to know whether this, what are we actually valuing? Is this valuation of what I think I read in your water impact protocol also, is it a cost of inaction? That is the valuation of damages that is happening if we don't take an action right now? Or is it, are you valuing the cost of action, that whatever mitigation efforts I'll take right now to avoid this, this is the present cost? So internally, we had to actually go through all this awareness that what is it? It's a damage cost, it's a mitigation cost, and there are so many ways to value it. But it's about what's the end result. What are you planning to do with that valuation result? So we had good discussion, and I think this opens up so many thoughts about, oh, this could be a possible risk. This can be some opportunities around here. And one thing which internally, I think, I won't say it's a challenge, but something which we learned along with this was that we moved from footprint to evaluation. Earlier, we are like, I think what Stephen also mentioned and Jens also mentioned, that companies are, we are all know how much meter cube of water we are using in different processing facilities, how much water efficiency programs we are putting, we are reducing. But now through our work, what we really learned was the importance of considering the neighboring ecosystem, the neighboring surroundings, from where water is withdrawn. So it was like going beyond water efficiency. You're really understanding that it's not just the meter cube, because what we understood, as an example, just for the audience, we were comparing two processing facilities, and one processing facilities, the water consumption was quite high compared to the other one. But what we really found out was that 600 meter cube of water consumption in that one facility led to $1 of hidden water cost. And the another facility, only 300 meter cube of water cost leads to same $1 of hidden water cost. So this really emphasizes the importance of having that, that dollar cost, that it's not just about efficiency now. You have to really consider the impacts that water use has on the surrounding, and there are different impact. And I think every means we have all that listed in the protocol also. It can be human health, it can be related to ecosystem, biodiversity, what can be the impact possible, and depending on your neighbor, depending on your surrounding neighborhood, one needs to assess that. So of course, challenges were internally, which were easy because it's something which Olam really believes in. That's a long-term value. We really need to see beyond our financial capital. But externally, what I would say, of course, and what my other co-panelist also mentioned was, since it's a very local, a very regionalized topic, so we need data that is more specific to where Olam's operations are. I cannot use one valuation factor where the study was somewhere done, let's say in somewhere in EU, but I have to apply it, let's say in Gabon or in Ghana or somewhere else. So how regionalized we can get? We started with watershed approach. We saw, but in watershed approach also some of the data sets were limiting. So then what else we can do there? So there were some of these things. And of course, to scale up, you need more digitization and efforts. So these were some of the challenges which we faced, but it was more on data limitations. But now as we grow, I think there is some standardization coming in. People are able to understand this better.
Great. Thank you, Ria. Already explaining how different business units and stakeholders internally have to be brought on board for the switch from footprints to impacts. And then also sharing those challenges that you face with local data gathering and how to apply them to your specific context in the global operational, but also value chain. And this sounds like, as you already indicated, like a big mindset change that is required. So how does Olam then incorporate those values of freshwater impacts into business decision making? Could you give an example there?
I think at least I can say for the Finance for Sustainability department, which we are leading, when we do any kind of such valuation works on non-financial accounting, there's a two purpose, why we are doing it. One is to really identify the risk and opportunities, the future risk and opportunities. And second is for how it can help us in decision making. So that's exactly what we are trying to do here. But the very first thing that we are really focusing here is why are we valuing it? And that comes from that mindset change that we would like to see, which you just mentioned. So it's not just about, we are spending so much on, let's say, on any one water related initiative, be it on water harvesting or water debit or credit or any kind of water efficiency. We are seeing that as an investment into a future. So it's not just cost, it's an investment into a future. And this applies not only for water, but even for other projects that we take. And since this department, Finance for Sustainability, is uniquely set up in the finance function, so this mindset change starts with the accountants and the BU regional CFOs and all that, that they need to see this apart, that these are not cost or expenses, which as per IFRS, this will right now be treated as conventional expenses and cost. But we, in our integrated impact statement, we consider these as investment. So first, that's important. And we right now, we are disclosing everything through integrated impact statement. We discuss this in our meetings, but it's important to really figure it out that using these valuation, how now we can alter our risk mitigation strategies. Should it now be related to, let's say, doing more projects on water efficiency, or we should look at beyond water efficiency projects? So it helps our corporate responsibility and sustainability department design accordingly what strategies deem fit for a particular commodity processing facility, since again, it's very, very regional.
Wow, this is really exciting to hear and see how the freshwater performance embedded in the ecosystem, how this translates into the olam's integrated risk and opportunities sheet and balance sheets and so on.
Yeah.
So I would like to do another round of questions. And also in the spirit of today's launch of the public consultation of the Water Impact Protocol. And I would like to ask you, Stefan, first, in your research, agricultural research work at the front edge of very innovative new solutions for so many stakeholders that are affected, all the farmers on the, on our globe. How do you see the Water Impact Protocol complement or add into your work? And what might be the challenges also?
Well, in my day-to-day work, it's difficult to translate. But what I was thinking when you asked the question, so how does it add value for companies and investors? How to guide them with such a protocol? And I said a couple of positive remarks about this before, and I was listening with interest. But I still wonder how such a protocol can be useful in practice, despite all the context and location-specific challenges that we have. It's because of the hydrology, because of the climate and the soils, but then because of all the different company challenges. Ria just explained there's a factor 300 sometimes in the hidden value of water, depending on local context specific situation. So how is that to protocol actually can really provide guidance? And I believe a flow diagram would be very useful, and not as a recipe how to do that, but really these are the key steps you have to include. And I think in earlier protocols versions, which I saw as part of the what is that, steering member, science member, or whatever I am in this group there, I think this list is nice, but then also kind of provide some more context and guidance how to do it. Not exactly a recipe, but give more guidance. And what I believe, because of the idiosyncrasy of every single company in this world, worked out examples, really to give something very practical to the colleagues who lead the water strategies, and kind of examples where they can really, oh yeah, that's maybe different or similar to my company, and work that out in quite some detail. I think that would be useful. And my last point, how can that protocol be really applied and making a difference in practice, is the kind of an auditing authority or something, which is there. I'm not sure who has the mandate to actually give that, to do that. Maybe from the investment people, there's something like this, but I think that would be useful to apply a standard actually, and something like this. Maybe half of you think I'm crazy, but I'm a scientist, so I'm allowed to say that. Okay, thanks. Over. I
really like your thoughts beyond the box. Is this how you say it in English? Yeah, thank you so much, Stefan. And I think you are very much to the point that no value chain, no farm system, no local hydrology, no company is the same. And how can such a protocol help standardize the approach? And I think that's the value in it. It only sets out the approach. And I really like your comments about how it could already be improved. So dear audience, please follow the lead of Stefan and submit your thoughts also in this survey that Deepa mentioned in the beginning. And moving on.
Sandra, and just just a note to share that we need to wrap up the panel in the next maximum 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. Maybe Ria and Jens, would you each share for 1 minute how you see the water impact protocol fit in your respective area of work, please?
Yeah, very shortly, we have to see that from the Stockholm Water Week, we are, of course, a community that takes water stewardship approaches, water catchment approaches, and the circularity, as Jehan put it so nicely, as a given. For us, this is not new. This is absolutely not a given for the outside world. That has to be reiterated again and again, and then to be translated into a pragmatic approach. And this is actually what the Water Impact Protocol helps very much in its state as it is now, even.
Bringing in this view of circular economy. Thank you. And Ria?
Yeah, so the team is, so internally we are going through water impact protocol, and I think 3 things which really, what I can share, Alexander, right now. It's, of course, it's an enabler and guide for not only large companies, all companies, and towards what it's a much needed, and most of our stakeholders actually internally and externally talk about standardization. So it is something which will lead towards at least a common approach, a standardization towards valuation approach. Secondly, most important is how it can further the understanding from footprint to impact. I think that's also something which really hits, when you go and read this protocol, the draft one, which I've read. And thirdly, I think I would say very important, that every company's value chain is very different. And sometimes you really need to understand across the value chain, across different regions, different commodities, where are those, those pain points, those impacts. So showing those impact pathways and maps, that's, I think, quite useful. And of course, everybody needs to customize it, but at least it shows, how to go about it. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Ria. I think these were actually already the perfect wrap-up words for this session. Thank you very much to every one of you. And I will hand over to Carlo Galli to wrap up the session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. I think we are probably closing sharp in 3 minutes, so there's not very much in terms of closing remarks. I'm very happy that in any case, at the end of the 2 sessions, you already made sort of a wrap up. What I would basically take away from these 2 sessions, and it's hard and subjective to take away on 2, 3 key bullet points what I heard here. Thank you the panelists for the great insights. One point I heard was about data and local data gap, because we're talking about science-based, we're talking about local scale catchment, stakeholder involvement. So it's more than technical, but also community type of understanding. And we know there is a gap in data in many places where we operate. And I think this is a gap to be closed. For example, on our side, we have used the Alliance Water Stewardship Standard in the way we deploy our water strategy locally. And this has been really useful tool because it has helped us to force into this data gathering, wherever the gap exists, and also in the understanding of the local stakeholders, and not to keep the data on our own, but to share the data with other neighbors, because this is the basis for understanding, the basis for raising awareness, and the basis for creating the conditions for collective action. The second piece is that water is part of a wider environmental set of topics. And I think that with many companies like our company booming with new climate change commitments, I think we need to make sure that water as a core element for climate change adaptation is embedded in these climate change commitments, which mainly speak about mitigation. And this is where we need to really look, someone touched on this, on how we can create the conditions for assessing co-benefits, because it's not only water, it's biodiversity, it's carbon. So there is something we can do, and maybe the water impact protocol as an additional smart tool to assess the numbers, the metrics, the targets, and have standardized assessment approach will help in that, not only to understand broader value chain, but also understanding financial decision making, as someone touched. So that is very quickly what I can take away from the session. Thanks a lot again to see many friendly faces. I think it's all on my side. Back to you, Deepa, if you want to say a few final words.
Thanks very much, Carlo, for the closing remarks. And thanks to all the panelists and speakers for this session today for the very engaging discussion. And thank you all to the participants for your time and your interest in this session. I just wanted to show you our email ID. So in case you would like to contact the organizers, please do write to us. And again, a quick reminder to go to the feedback survey for the Water Impact Protocol, which lets you look at the draft of the protocol and through a survey seek your feedback. So we really count on your feedback to make this sort of constructive and useful. And thank you again, and I hope you really enjoyed the discussion.